I'm going to be talking about how Bird we've adopted a bring your own key infrastructure using the Thales Cipher Trust Manager. So why bring your own keys? Well, financial services, banks and the like have a number of requirements that they place on law firms through outside counsel guidelines, client terms, security questionnaires. We've all had the pain of bank security questionnaires, I'm sure. They get longer and longer, and there's much more focus now on cloud services. So in particular, banks are concerned about who manages the keys for encryption of their data in cloud services. In one particular OCG I know from JP Morgan, for example, they specifically call out that the law firm needs to control and manage their own encryption keys. So the banks feel very much that they're trusting the law firms with their secret data. So they want to make sure that we protect it wherever it is. And in particular in cloud, they want to make sure that it's protected with the highest encryption capable and that we manage those keys. So law firms are also starting to use cloud services, Office 365, etc., and document management systems are naturally going to flow from on-site to cloud services. I'm sure we're all considering a cloud-hosted DMS for our next DMS move in the near future. So what we're doing is putting in building blocks for a secure cloud services. We thought about the process that we needed to look at in order to ensure that the data that we put in cloud is protected to the highest level. And in doing that, we've thought that rather than using the encryption that is placed on every cloud service using the vendor's generic encryption keys, that we'd use our own keys. So what that means is that the keys that we produce and upload to our cloud are key wrapping keys. So the cloud vendor uses their own key all the time to encrypt data. Our keys are then placed over the cloud vendor's keys in a wrapping or KEK, key encryption key process, which means that at any time we can expire or rotate those keys, and the data that's encrypted with those keys is no longer available. So you can set up bring your own key using the cloud vendor's own key manager. AWS have KMS, Azure have Key Vault. You can do it as it's possible to do, but it's very manual process. Backups and key rotations are manual. They're very different solutions. It's a very intensive and somewhat complicated mechanism to manage keys in these environments, and they are very different. So you would necessarily have to have perhaps two sets of people understanding how the key management worked in different cloud vendors' solutions. So the reason we chose the Thales appliances is because they reside in our own data centers and they're providing that secure key protection. So the initial key material, which is what is used to generate the actual keys, never leaves the Thales Cipher Trust Manager, which is an appliance. Those keys are then securely posted from effectively your hardware security module HSM into the cloud vendor's HSM, which is typically a Thales HSM that's hosted by Microsoft or AWS or Google or whoever it is. And then you've got full control over how those keys are used, how those keys are rotated. You can rotate keys on a daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly basis, for example. You can back up the keys directly from the cloud key management system onto the Cipher Trust Manager. And then if you want, you can also back them up locally to storage that you can put elsewhere in your network. And the whole point about the Cipher Trust Cloud Manager is that they're a common user interface. It's one portal. It looks and feels the same for all the different cloud vendors. It makes it much easier to use for IT operations staff on a daily basis. It's not something that they've got to think about the different types of key management solutions. So how do you know that the cloud vendor can't access your data with your keys? As I mentioned earlier, it's HSM to HSM key exchange, effectively your appliance in your data center that is sending keys directly into the cloud vendor's HSM. Now, the HSMs have very good logging and auditing capabilities. You obviously tap into that using the native log solutions on those platforms. And there's independent auditing of cloud vendors. CSA, for example, will audit Microsoft, Google, and AWS to ensure that they are compliant and are not able to access those HSMs without the customer being aware that their keys have been used. And if you want, of course, you can go down the route of using, say, the Azure HSM on demand or AWS Cloud HSM, which are effectively your own HSM that is hosted in those environments, and therefore there's no access at all by the cloud vendor, but they are very expensive options. The multi-cloud key management, as I mentioned earlier, makes it much easier to have a consistent and cohesive key management solution. It's all done in the one portal, Azure, AWS, Google, Salesforce. It's all done through one solution. What can you encrypt with your keys? A number of different things. I mean, there's tons of different ways you can use your cloud keys, but as an example, Azure data at rest using storage encryption, BitLocker, Office 365 service encryption with customer key. That's what we're implementing at the moment to protect our OneDrive for Business, SharePoint, Exchange mailboxes, and Teams chat and files, for example. So this means that all the data that we start sharing in those environments, so say we're sharing data internally or potentially externally with clients in Teams, that data is then protected with our encryption keys. And we're looking at additional protections as well, of course, things like Azure Information Protection and DLP that go hand in hand with that. Data in use, SQL Online, and there are a few others within Office 365 that you can protect in use as well. So that actually protects the data in the database while it's being used. And other data at rest applications in AWS and virtual machines, for example. Some of the other options that we've not taken, but they are available with the Thales Cipher Trust Manager, and that's file and folder encryption. So you can actually send files to cloud that are encrypted individually with your encryption keys. So managing your data in someone else's cloud application is starting to become very important for us as a law firm, and I'm sure other law firms are coming across this. Legal tech firms typically embrace the cloud, AWS or Azure, and they are offering their services to our lawyers to host client data. Now, with Bring Your Own Key, we have the ability to provide encryption keys to those other tenants, and our data is then encrypted on their platforms using our keys. I did a very similar activity in my previous law firm where I was at prior to Bird & Bird, with Relativity One and another couple of other solutions on AWS. And at Bird & Bird, we are actively working with two legal tech firms where we're providing our AWS encryption keys to their tenants so that they can encrypt our data in their platform. That means that you've still got protection of client data or your own data in another legal tech solution. And then, of course, exiting cloud contracts is an important consideration. So if we decide that we no longer want to work with AWS or we no longer want to work with Azure, we can expire those keys so that the data within those platforms on hard disks in data centers, wherever we've decided to keep data, is no longer available. So the cloud vendor can't access those disks, and then we can quite happily move to another cloud vendor, knowing that our data is protected in the old vendor. So Cipher Trust Cloud Key Manager, or CCKM, is the product that is a kind of broker, or call it an orchestration piece. It's the solution that actually manages the keys within its environment and then takes the keys from the internal digital security manager, or SafeNet in the example of the Cipher Trust Manager, and then pushes the keys to the cloud. The solution that we have is a virtual machine. They're hosted in our own data centers. You can have physical machines or virtual machines. And it's now a single virtual machine or two virtual machines for redundancy, but it's a very integrated product. My previous experience with this solution at my previous firm actually used 7 servers. So it was 2 hardware boxes and then 2 CCKMs and then 3 MongoDB enterprise databases. So over the last year or so, Thales have done a great job in putting all those products into a single virtual machine or single physical appliance. So it's much easier to manage. And it works perfectly well with an internal proxy server. So it can be on site in your data center or your office environment if you've got a server room or something. And they are FIPS 140 certified products. So just a very brief demonstration of how you actually connect your key manager. Basically with AWS, it's a service principal that you connect to your Cipher Trust Manager, and in Azure, it's enterprise app or an app registration. So it's effectively an API. As you can see, I've connected our AWS and Azure clouds. The keys are then created using the Cipher Trust Cloud Key Manager, which is the Cloud Key Manager in the middle here. Those keys are then posted to the various different clouds in exactly the same way. You can add a new connection onto a different cloud here, and they look exactly the same. There's a few other products that you can see here. This is the file and folder encryption that we're not using, but they are available, and database encryption as well. Just to show you how easy setting up schedules for key rotations or backups, it's exactly the same screen for any cloud vendor. And there's policies that you can set up to allow external access to those keys. This was something that I was looking at earlier this week when I was trying to set up external access to our AWS keys. It's quite a complicated mechanism that you have to go through with AWS. And when I looked at the way that Thales did it, it's so much easier. All you need to do is put in the ID of the external account. It just shows you that I probably wasted an hour or so trying to set up the policies on AWS when the Thales appliance was so much easier to set up. Really, it's a great product. I think it's very important to ensure that you have a good partner to work with. Someone like Mobliciti, great, because they know the product very well. And Thales are a big organization. They have many products, and it can be quite a complex installation. Nowadays, it's a lot simpler, I feel. When I first looked at the solution I mentioned earlier, and it was 7 boxes, it took about 2 weeks to configure. When we set the Cipher Trust Manager up a few months ago, it took 2 hours. I mean, it was a much, much easier solution. So it's a much more integrated and cohesive solution nowadays, and we're very happy with it.